is to, I want to shut that, the music. What I'd like to do is to go over the essential points that we did before so we can get first of all, we can get a video recording. And secondly, so that we can do more at one time to sort of see a picture, which I don't think we had an opportunity to really get last time, because we were focusing very much on the Simchat Torah and the Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot connections, which were important for last week when we were right after Sukkot, are less important now because it won't add that much to people's lives. So let us begin with an overall sense of the way in which this Sefer develops. Now, we have to understand that this Sefer Nehemia is not coming in a vacuum. We just finished the entire story of Sefer Ezra, you will recall. So, in Sefer Ezra, we already had, the Meister Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Michli, Kol Mili de Ezra Nehemia Kosv, is, as we saw, Rashi says, it means rove, because the fact is that Sefer Nehemia is rove of the total content. It includes a great deal from Sefer Ezra as well. And therefore, we're saying, look, if Nehemia was the one who wrote it, why don't we give him at least his own book? That he should be called Nehemia. Of course, we have this book which we call Nehemia, but Chazal don't. So in the Chof Dalet Sifrei Tanakh, there is no separate book Nehemia. There's only the book of Ezra, which includes Nehemia. Why that is, we'll get back to. But the question right now is, in order to fully understand what is going on over here, we have to recognize that this is a continuation of events that took place much before and are coming in a way to make everything that took place earlier in Ezra, for the first time, real, sustainable, and long-lasting, which is pretty much of a shock, because we've already had two aliyot, you remember. We had the aliyah that came early on, and that was with 12,000 people. And that was the first aliyah that was described back in Sefer Ezra, where we had the aliyah of we're not quite certain who it is, it's Shesh Batzar, it's called, with 12,000 people, all apparently from the Zer HaMalucha. And then we had Zerubbabel's aliyah, also another 30,000 people. And Ezra's truma to all of this was that he was empowered by the Melech to be able to build the Beis HaMikdash and to restore the Aveda and to be Miyachis Yisrael and to be given the rights of Mishpat. And those rights of Mishpat are defined in Sefer Ezra. They cover a vast land area from the other side of the Yarden, as you would look at it when you're in Bava. Now, for some reason, not much came of that. And that's really weird. And it's to such an extent surprising that even though the Gemara says that our beginning of the pasuk here, which is Divrei Nehemia ben Chachaliah, Vayi b'chodesh Kislev Shnat Esrim, and it doesn't say Shnat Esrim to what? Shnat Esrim v'ani hayiti b'Shushan Habira. So the Gemara says Shnat Esrim. We find Shnat Esrim used also for the dating of our Tarshas, as we'll see. So this must be the same Shnat Esrim, which would mean that essentially this is 14 years after the completion of the Beis HaMikdash, because up until the second year of Dariavesh, who was called Atarshas, so we find that the Beis HaMikdash wasn't built. Ezra comes in the third year and is able to undo the damages that had been caused by the tremendous hitnagdut to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, where even after Koresh had announced that the Jews have a right to go back, and we know the Gemara that says Koresh was called Mishichi, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was angry that Koresh should have actually pushed for the Aliyah, but he didn't push, and in the end only 40,000 people went back. We know, as we mentioned last week as well, that there's the amazing sheet of the Ramban that actually, when Koresh made his announcement, most of the Jews went back, and that it's only afterwards they dribbled back the bubble again when they saw that nothing was happening. The reason nothing was happening was because, remember, that many of the Goyim had moved in to what was once the territory of Israel, and they were not very happy with the idea of the building of the Beis HaMikdash that they saw as the beginning of a resurgence of the Jews. And so as happened back in Sefer Ezra, they asked to be part of the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. But these were not just Goyim. These were Goyim who had become deeply involved in the Jewish issue, particularly through intermarriage. And that intermarriage turned them into what was known as Baalei Brit, as we'll see. And because of that, they had a tremendous amount of political power. Now, what happened is that Ezra, you'll recall, is the famous Gemara in Erechim, Lo lachem v'lanu livnot beit Elokim, that the people that had been settled there on purpose by the Goyim, that they moved into Kutian, that's still from earlier, and all the others that had moved in since, they don't have the right to build the Beis HaMikdash in any way. They can't be mishtatef in the building, the binyan of the Beis HaMikdash. And from there we learn halacha is about if a guy wants to be a shituf and building a Beit HaKnesset, what kind of things he's allowed to give, what kind of things we don't accept, and so on and so forth. So that was established by Ezra. The result of Ezra's very fine attempt to keep the Beis HaMikdash tahar, to keep the Yechusim clear, and to even wait until he was able to bring along Levium and the knas that he gave to the Levium because they didn't come, he was entirely focused on the Beis HaMikdash. We know that because, as Tosas points out, it doesn't make any sense to say that all of a sudden Nehemia is coming to build Yerushalayim. Didn't Ezra build Yerushalayim 14 years earlier? And therefore, he wants to say that maybe 14 years is actually from Koresh, Shnas Esrei from Koresh, which brings us indeed to the third year of Daryavesh, and that therefore this is the description, essentially from the other point of view, of the building of the Beis HaMikdash through Nehemia's intercession, which then joins up with Ezra. That's Keneged almost all of the Gemaras, the Pashtus of the Gemaras. And so Tosfos finally comes out with, you know what? Maybe the reality is that Ezra indeed was from that third year. The Beis HaMikdash was built third, fourth, fifth, and sixth year. They made the scene of the Beis HaMikdash, and everything went according to Ezra's vision, but didn't go anywhere. Why didn't it go anywhere? Because you'll notice that all Nehemia cares about here is about Yerushalayim, specifically. And not about the Kohanim, not about the Mishpachot HaLeviyim, not even, according to the Malbim, about the Am that had come with Ezra, who indeed had political support because he came with the backing of the government, and to whom the description in the Pasuk that says how horrible their situation was doesn't seem to apply properly. And therefore, as he understands it, the Malbim, the question whether this is accurate or not is not as important as the clarity of the underlying fact that the Ezra movement is entirely different than the Nehemia movement. And that is very important, both as an understanding of why Lamaisa, the two Svarim, are mechulik between Ezra and Nehemia, even though they're called Ezra, we'll see why. But also because of the implications for how necessary Nehemia is for the success of Ezra. Now, let's take a look at that next pasuk and see what it was that Nehemia was looking for. Because it is so strikingly different than everything that Ezra was focused on, that it's almost as if we're talking about two completely different visions. And according to those of these two visions, they may have taken place simultaneously. It's not the pshat that any of the other Rishonim essentially accept. But whether it's simultaneous or whether it's 14 years apart is not important. What's important is that they really are two different visions. So let's see what bothered Nehemia. Vayavo Hanani Echad mi'achai, hu va'anashim Yehuda. So one of, an ach doesn't necessarily mean obviously a literal ach, although some take it that way. But an ach always means we know all over anashim achim anachnu, or even later on, like we use it today, it came to mean a friend, which is how many of the Mefarshim understands it. And the stuff it says, it means a friend of mine that I knew from before. Somebody I could trust. Hu va'anashim Yehuda, and va'eshalim ha'Yehudim ha'pleita, asher nisharu me'ashevi va'al Yerushalayim. I asked them about the escapees. I asked them about the ones that were left from the Shevi. Now, some understand that indeed this means not that he asked them about the Ezra people. Those weren't the people that were Nishar Min HaShevi. Those were people that were being supported by the government. Nishar Min HaShevi means the ones perhaps Israel. Indeed, there was a continual settlement that even though the Nebuchadnezzar and those after had continued the mice of the Churban and moving the Jews, but again, we know that the Dalat Haaretz were left behind. And we know that to such extent that they were left behind, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had already offered Yochanan ben Kireah the possibility of a complete and total restoration of Eretz Yisrael, even though it would be built literally of the Dalat Haaretz. So then that means if he's looking for the Pleita, specifically, Min HaShevi, so that's the first thing I wanted to know. What about those that escaped the Golos? Or, if we don't understand it that way, it means what about those that had come after Koresh? What the Ramban understands. And were indeed escapees from the ones that went back to Bavel, so they were Nisharu from the Shevi, and they were not maybe benefited by what Ezra had done, which will turn out to be very significant. And another question I had, the Al Yerushalayim. I wanted to know the status of Yerushalayim. And as Rashi points out, this means Al Yerushalayim Al Inyan Ha'ir. Quite aside, which is really strange, quite aside from the situation of the people. You think, okay, that's what my interest is. I want to know, how is the city doing? Now, what do you mean when you say, how is the city doing? I mean, are we talking about the Beis HaMikdash? No. We know how the Beis HaMikdash is doing. The Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt. The rebuilding was celebrated. But he's talking about Yerushalayim as a city. And that means that he has a completely different vision. And we're going to see. He builds on that when he even refuses to call, in the next Perek, refuses to call Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim to the king when he's trying to get permission to rebuild. He calls it the city of the Ikvarot, of my relatives. You know, it has personal, emotional significance, blah, 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 without in any way making any type of political or religious significance to Yerushalayim. And that, too, is in and of itself an important point, as we'll see when we get there. But, and again, as the Malbim points out, the answer came separately about the Yehudim of the Pleita and the Matzav of Yerushalayim, Kwa Yerushalayim. So that means they understood very clearly. He was asking about two issues. And therefore they answered him, A, you asked about the Pleita, Nisharu. Well, we'll tell you, Ha-Nisharim, which you asked, quote, Asher Nisharum and Ha-Shavi. That's what you asked, right? Okay, well, we're going to tell you the truth. They are there in the Medina, Bera'ah Gedolah V'Charpah. You asked about Yerushalayim, Chomat Yerushalayim Miforetzet, U'Sha'areha Nitztu Va'esh. The same Churban has not been touched. The burned down gates to Yerushalayim from the time of Nebuchadnezzar are still burned down. It's as if nothing happened. So there may be a Beit HaMikdash there. The implications about the way that people are living And the vision, and you'll notice this very important word, Sham Medina. Sham Medina, what does that mean, Ba Medina? When we're talking about the state of Israel with their Declaration of Independence. But Medina, remember, has a very specific halachic meaning. I mean, Medina, it's Machlokas, Ramba, in terms of whether Yerushalayim, when there's a Chomat Yerushalayim, that is Mekudesh, and so on, whether that has a din of Mikdash, or that has a din of Medina. But we know under certain circumstances, of course, we mean specifically Mikdash versus the Medina, which would include aspects that are outside of Beis Hamikdash. Medina, by definition, means a place of social contract. That's the concept of din, achvat ha-medinot, the lashon of the Mesilat Yesharim, mediniyut. Medinut throughout the Middle Ages meant the social contract. In which case, what they're saying to him is something that means a great deal to him. They're saying that there is no real functional Medina. Things are horrific. So if you're associated with the Beis Hamikdash, and that was Ezra's vision, and so he has everything split up over here into the Mishmarot HaKuna, into the Mishpachot HaLeviyim, which we learned about back in Ezra. And their support crew, basically support for the Beis Hamikdash. Anybody who's not directly a part of that effort, this is the way many of the Rishonim understand, the Yesharim, the Napleta, they are in the Medina, and they don't have the future. And so, Vayikishomiyat HaDevarim Ha'ela Yashavti, this lotion of Yashavti, say the Meforshim means Yashavti literally. Yashavti, lotion of Shiva. I sat Shiva. So Yashavti Vevkev et Abla Yamim. So this was his din, Shlosha Yamim of Bechi for Avelis. And because of that, the shock to me was unbelievable. And I was in a state of tinnitus and davening in front of Elohei HaShamayim. But the point is, as Avram Avinu pointed out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu many years before, Elohei HaShamayim, Elohei HaAretz is, you used to be only Elohei HaShamayim. Remember, you owe me that one. Because since I came, I was Mefarset at Shimcha, and you became Elohei HaAretz. So he seems to be making a point, Nehemia. I had a lot of words to say to Elohei HaShamayim, who no longer seems to be present on the earth and isn't doing very much for the earth. Now, you'll say, okay, I mean, it's taking an awful lot out of that word, but it isn't, you see. Because this is exactly the period when they crossed out the words of El Agadol Agibor Vanora. And therefore, as the Gemara tells us, in the end it was the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah who are called Gedolah because they were the ones who actually restored. Remember, and they said, no, even though, look, we can't lie to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you know. So Yirmiyahu cuts out. Yeah, one word is, I mean, you can't say no when look at this, it's horrible. Then he cuts out the Gibor, you know, well, what kind of Gibor? The Goyim are sitting around doing whatever they want. That's called Noraot. He lets them get away with murder. That's called Gvura. It's terrible. So ask the Gemara stand. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who said, I mean, who are you to go and to say, as Yirmiyahu did, Nochrim Mekarkrim Be'echalot, the Gemara Yuma says, where's the Noraot? So you refuse to say Norah. Daniel says, it's worse than that. Nochrim Mishtabdim Bevanav. Where's Gemuratav? Lo Amar Gibor. Came along Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. What? And they restored it. You know where the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah restored it? In Sefer Nehemia. Now that's strange, because it was Ezra that the Gemara's Medayik restored it. Why? Because it says that they called out, in the whole story when they were being Mavatal, it said they called out to El Hashem Elokim HaGadol. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what's Hagadol supposed to mean? So one man, the Amr says it means Gidlo b'Shem HaMeforash. But in the end, the Gemara comes out, no, that's not the pshat. The pshat is that they restored the Shem. So Hashem Elohim Hagadol was the restoration that became the Anshe Knesses Hagedolah. Based on that Shem Hagadol, that they then said, Hakel Hagadol HaGibor VaNorah, which hadn't been in use since the time of Yirmiyahu. Now, is that significant to our story? I suggest that it's very, very significant to our story. So let's understand that essentially what this is saying is that this book is the story of the reconstruction of the Medina. Nehemia has no interest in restoring the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash has been around for 14 years. He doesn't even ask about it. What he wants to know is, so how come nothing's happening? And indeed, his friends who come, Hanani understands very clearly what he's saying. You're asking about two things which essentially are fundamentally related. You want to know about the city of Yerushalayim, Kwa Yerushalayim, and you're asking about the people that remain from the days before the Churban, the ones that had remained after coming up from Koresh when everyone else ran away. So we understand, you're asking, is there a social structure? Is there a country? Or have we become merely a Beis HaMikdash? And all that we want is a place of worship. So we understand that that's your point. So we're telling you straight out, the Medina, forget about it. It's in terrible shape. It's in terrible shape, and Nehemia immediately understands what that means, is that Ezra has failed. And that Ezra's approach has failed. Because you will recall when we learned Ezra, that his entire rationale to develop of why it's kedai to build the Beis HaMikdash is a description of the tremendous bracha that comes to the Beis HaMikdash, the entire world, and the goyim that will support the Beis HaMikdash will indeed be zeicha, and that's the whole story that Koresh says, yes, you have to be mitpalel there for me and my children and my success, and so on. Because of that, as the Mepharshim point out, Ezra couldn't even ask for military support. Because what an idiot he would look like. That would be like Bilam who needed a sword to kill it. All I need to do is say something, and everyone drops dead. But when it comes to my donkey, I need a sword. So he's going to come along now, and he's telling Koresh, oh my God, the Daryavish have no idea what's coming, and it's amazing. And but I'll need some help, of course, with some of your troops, because otherwise I'll get my head handed to me. He couldn't do that. So he ended up being given only the rights that he asked for. We need to assert the vested in the Chatera, and this became Ezra Sefer, who reconstructs the whole Sefer Torah. He now is Mechadesh, or else he restores the Ksav Ashuris that had gone out of fashion, and everything was chulin. This is the way most of the Mepharshim understand it. That, of course, originally, this we see from the Mem V'Samach, that they were Emet Benes and Aluchais, that the tzura of the Mem V'Samach was Ksav Ashuris, initially. But the darga of the Kedusha of Ksav Ashuris was such that in the end they were Mevato the use of Ashuris, and so everybody started using and only recognized the Ksav Ivri. And then when he came back, he created the entire dinim of the Kedusha, Sefer Torah, and the Hakpodah Dafka to use Ksav Ashuris across the board, which is tremendous Kiddush. But it's all part of Ezra's search for what he kept calling back in Sefer Ezra, Zera Kodesh. His work on Yichusim was all about Zera Kodesh. His work on making certain that the Goyim had nothing to do with the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Purity. Zera Kodesh. His work on making sure that everybody would divorce their wives who were not Jewish was based on his own Chiddush. Doesn't say in the Torah not allowed to marry a Goyim. says you're not allowed to marry from the Amamim, the Shiva Amamim that were in Eretz Yisrael, and that there'll be Lamokesh and so on and so forth. This halacha, that is an Isser, the Yoraisa, not everybody's Makabo. I mean, the source of it is his drasha then, that insisted that they had no right to marry the Mechastro. I think all these people came and married Goyim when it was the fair Shaposik in the Torah not to marry them. No, they held that it was heter, because these Goyim were not from the original Shiva Hamamim. So what's wrong if we marry them? And Adarabba, we'll get them to be Megayer ultimately, and it's fine. So he was the one that made such a fuss. And he was the one that had to be Matire everything. And did it work? No. When Nehemia comes 14 years later, everybody's married to God. So, instead it turns out that this whole idea of creating an Am through Ruchnias, creating an Am through the tremendous gatherings that he had of, tearing his hair and then lying on the ground and crying and getting people really churned up, and they all commit themselves to, yeah. You know how long that kind of thing lasts, And sure enough, 14 years later, they're all a bunch of idiots again, because nothing ever changed, because he never did anything, Ezra. He made tremendous changes in terms of the Tfisa of Torah. The Tfisa of Torah doesn't change anything for people. And in the same way, this is how we started discussing the relationship to Simchas Torah and the way in which the Am, remember we spoke about amazing Gemara about Achav, that it's the fact that the Zikanim were there didn't mean anything. Maybe Machmad Necha refers to an Avodah Zarah. No, Machmad Necha, that's his chus, 22 years for the 22 letters of the Sacred Torah that it was Machabe. How do you know it means that? Maybe it doesn't mean Avodah Zarah. Says, well, it can't be. It says Ziknei Yisrael. Ask the Gemara, Ziknei Yisrael. Ziknei Yisrael says the same thing by the wonderful eights of the Ziknei Yisrael, to Avshalom, to go do arayas in public. Everybody will know that they'll never be able to have his father back. That says Ziknei Yisrael, means Rishayim. Yes, says the Gemara, it's true. But by Achav, it says not only the Zikanim, it says the Am. The Am can't be Rishayim. The Gedolei Torah can be Rishayim. The Ziknei Yisrael can be Rishayim. The Am is going to be Rishayim. It's not Shayach. It's got to. The Am never. They're the taxi drivers with the Rishayim. I mean, there's got to be tons of tzaddikim among the taxi drivers, right? That's very much what we feel about Simchas Torah as well. It's the Karum Zulusu. It's a holiday that was created by people, by Amei Haaretz, and by people of Chutz La'aretz, and so on and so forth, which ties in directly to the idea of Dalas Haaretz, the lowest of the low that remain. Or, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu offered, we talked about on Tzom Gedalia, offered Yochanan ben Kareach. I know nobody is here, so what? I'm promising you. You stay, I rebuild like you never had before. I guarantee it. Who's there to rebuild with? Taxi drivers. Fine, that's great. Or, as Yechezkel points out, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, look, I told Tzidkiyahu's children, accept the fact to be a mamlacha shefela, be a third world country. Stop believing you have to be on top of the world. And you made a promise to Nebuchadnezzar with a shvuah. And then you were Mechalel Hashem by being over on your shvuah. So I'm supposed to protect you and not Nebuchadnezzar. You're crazy? And this, of course, was the end of that whole thing. The inability to accept that the Yeshua comes from bottom up, not from Beis HaMikdash down. There has to be a Medina, which has amazing implications for our own period, in which we will see that Nehemia took exactly the opposite approach of Ezra, And what Nehemia did is he specifically, we'll see next part, specifically asked for military backing. He was an immensely aware politician who knew exactly how to deal with all of the people that were the Baalei Brit. He didn't hesitate from using all kinds of nasty force, many, many different ways to achieve his ends. He rebuilt in a massive rebuilding effort that became, in our times, the same idea of Choma and Migdal, in which overnight they would build these Chomot. That came consciously. That came from Nehemia. And that was done throughout the Galil to protect new Yeshuvim from Arabs overnight. That's almost what he attempted to do in Yerushalayim. As close to overnight it could be done. Before they had a chance to get their forces together and to prevent the rebuilding, he rebuilt the Medina. And it's called Medina. Nobody understands why. This is why. This was the entire vision of Nehemia. Build the Medina. Then the Beis HaMikdash can mean something. As it is, it doesn't mean anything. Amazingly, this is brought out in the very name that we'll see he's called in relationship to the king. So he's called not Nehemia, but he's called Nehemia, who has the other name, which is Hatarshata. See, what kind of weird name is Hatarshata? It sounds weirdly like Artaxerxes is the king. Was this going to play on word? No, Hatarshata means that they were hitir shtiya. They were matir him to drink wine of a goy. And that becomes his name. You understand? It's not a small issue. That's his name. Okay, so people say, oh yeah, all right, fine. So, we need to know who he is. How come he was drinking wine? I mean, wasn't it us or that? Yeah, they had to be matir because he was appointed, as we'll see in the next Perek, he was appointed to be the one who was magish the wine to the king. That's all we need. He needed to taste the wine. He was also a poison taster. You understand? Before you feed it to the king, you pour a little bit out. You taste it to show that it's not poison, obviously. So therefore, we need it to be matir. Misses the whole point. Because we're going to see in the next Perek that he himself identifies the fact that he was allowed to drink the wine as the reason that he was able to achieve all of this. Why? Because he became the king's drinking buddy. You understand that a drinking buddy has got all kinds of abilities that nobody else does. And that's exactly why the Torah asks you drinking, remember. You'll start drinking and then you'll marry. That is the way the Rabbanan extended Yain Nesach to be a general din. Stay away from it. You'll end up marrying their daughters and so on and so forth. Unbelievable. This is a direct hemshech of Esther. The idea of Esther is that the Geula comes from Keri. The Geula comes as a secular holiday, not a religious holiday. The Hester of Anochi Astir is part of the built-in development of the Pnei HaGeula, as Ramban identifies as the real meaning of Anochi Astir, is that Hester. What does all of this mean in terms of Pnei HaGeula? So even when you're in the midst of the most astonishing developments, you don't even notice what's going on. You take it for granted and assume that, Olam Kiminago Noeg. And that means, if you want to think of the most amazing thing, the Mesilas Yesharim, the Rebbe's the Mesilas Yesharim, is outstanding. Because something the Mesilas Yesharim said, nobody understands, such a chutzpah, my gosh. So he's defining what it means. Lalechet b'drachav, goshi tiferes, v'osea, tiferes v'ben adam. So the Mesilas Yesharim says, yes, what does that mean? This is in the Hagdama, right? Klal, what is that? Klal kol zeh, she'inhag adam kol midotav, v'chol minei pu'ulotav, al pi hayosher v'hamusah. Uchalalu chachamim zichronam levracha in Mesechet Avot, kol shi tiferet lo seah v'tiferet lo mina adam. Which I can tell you very simply what that means. Dehainu. Want to hear what that means? Kol ha'olech el tachlit ha'hatava ha'amitit. Everything that achieves the ultimate true good. And what is the ultimate true good? Tachlit ha'hatava ha'amitit. Dehainu. And notice, whereas, because he's getting up to this, right? Dehainu, shetolata. The first part sounds good. Chizuk HaTorah, yeah, that's good. That was Ezra's approach. Chizuk HaTorah, yeah, but Mr. Shem says, but that's not the end. And wait till you're going to faint when you hear the next part. V'tikun achvat hamedinot. Sounds like a conservative rabbi. You know, there's two important things in the world. The social contract and relationships between societies and the chizakat Torah. And those are the two things that are the tachlit of hatava amitit. It's amazing. And of course, the Rambam himself says even worse than that. Because when he explains why it is that the davar cotton is so chashuv, yes, the davar cotton is very chashuv, not only because you can understand the davar cotton with pardes until you have a davar cotton, but because it was the Tovah HaGedolah, the same language, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us for Yishuv Olam Hazeh. Amazing. So all of this is basically what Nehemia decides. First the davar cotton, then the davar gadol. Let's have a Medina and then see whether our Beis HaMikdash does something. Let's create the space. Let's create the mechitzas. And we pointed out that when we were in the Midbar, even in the Midbar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mitzvah on the Mishkan, and the entire Am is surrounding the Mishkan, and everything is built on Mishkan. We go immediately from the Hashlama of the Mishkan into the Hashlama of the Machaneh. So that all of the dinim that afterwards become the Hashra of the Mishkan throughout Yisrael are built on the dinim of the Machaneh, Shiluach Temeim and Birkas Chayanim, and the dinim of Nazirus, and everything else that is involved in the Darga, including Shaita, and the most intimate things, the Darga of Kedusha Yisrael. They come from being able to expand a Mishkan into a Medina. But there needs to be, remember the Machaneh is connected Machaneh Yisrael, which is connected Yerushalayim. That space, the creation of that space, which in the Midbar was created in advance of the Ashras Hashkin on the Mishkan. That's exactly what it is that Nehemia is out to achieve. And because of that, everything that in Ezra didn't work is redone in Nehemia, and it works. And basically, these small beginnings that HaKadosh Baruch Hu offered in terms of Mamlaka Shvela, or offered in terms of Dalata Aretz, the truth is that small beginnings need to be small. So the political and military agenda that he had in Nehemia was part of the success. Becoming a drinking buddy was part of the success. In exactly the same way that Esther achieved what she achieved, not by being Mrs. well-known spiritualist, but by being the most beautiful girl in the country, by being the one who can seduce the Melech, by being the one who creates the body buddy for the king. And here we continue, and as we pointed out last week, the drinking buddy paraphrases Esther, and the Gemara is about Esther even more than Esther did. So when she says, Imal HaMelech Tov, Yimatzati Chen, V'nei HaMelech, all of which Chazal say, well, of course, wherever it says HaMelech, it means Melech Macham Lochim. You know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yeah, as we said, you take that a little bit with a grain of salt. I mean, come on, what she's really being mitkab. And over here, in the next Perek, Nehemia says openly that that's what I was mechaven to. Take a look at Perek Beis. Vayi b'chodesh Nisan shnat esrim l'tachshas ha'melech, which is the mocker of the Gzera Shava that the Gemara makes. Shnat esrim l'Gzera Shava. Yayin lefanav, v'esata yayin v'tnei l'melech, v'lo yitira lefanav. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means when Haman came to Achashverosh, he said, "V'lamelech ein shovel anicham." The Gemara says, "Why ain't shovel anicham? Im Adoni HaMelech, im zvuv nofel letoch hakos shel hachamehem, uzorek et hazvuv v'shoter et hakos. Aval im Adoni HaMelech nogea bakos, im zorkim et hakos." And therefore, ain't shovel anicham. These people are crazy. Lo yitira lefanav, you know? It wasn't so bad. And we were good friends. And so, Vayomer li HaMelech, you know, Melech is a friend of mine. He treats me the way Yosef treated his people. Hey, madua panecha ra'in, how come you look so sad today, you know? You're not sick. I see you're not sick. This is a mental problem. Ein zekim ro'a lev. Look, you're depressed. What the hell is wrong? V'ira arbei ma'od. Now I sense this is the moment. This is the moment. So what do? You take a look what he says in Perek Dalet. Vayomer li HaMelech hamaza adam mevakesh v'et palel el Elohei hashamayim v'omar lamelech im lamelech tov v'nitav avdecha lefanav. That's his tefillah, Elohei hashamayim. He's talking to the king, but he's talking to Elohei hashamayim. The mamish takes on the approach of Esther completely. And that's the way in which he gets everything that he wants. This becomes an integral part of his success. Ezra duplicates Moshe Rabbeinu, but Nehemia duplicates Esther. That makes a tremendous difference in terms of the success in a period of Anochi Aster. And this, remember, remains Aster. There was no Shechina in the second Beis HaMikdash. The Pnei HaGeula, therefore, is a gradual development. And the truth is, I mean, we don't even know, after this beginning, we don't know exactly how it is that this beginning provided all of the roots for the development of a full country that we see years later, was able to take on the Greeks and was able to take on the Romans and became, in fact, an entire Medina in the full sense of the word, and wasn't only dependent on a Mikdash in Yerushalayim. The gradual development of those places and the number of different cities that are mentioned later on, the broadening of the Gvulot, how long that took to happen, the exact process of how it happened isn't clear. But it is clear that this was the beginning. And it's obvious that that's the case because the Goyim were devastated by the success of the walls of Yerushalayim. More devastated by far than they had been by the success of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Which means that they were aware that they had less to fear from a spiritual center of the Jews, which is what? That's basically religion. So you want to turn Yerushalayim into Borough Park. That's basically what you've done. So you built the Beis HaMikdash. So now they have Bobav. No? Looks like the Beis HaMikdash, because many people in the Beis HaMikdash, same thing. But that's the whole idea that he brings out, Nehemia. That's not the solution. And from there, we're not going to end up with the Medina that we're looking to create. And so because of that, he takes literally the opposite approach. And in his book, we find indeed the restoration of all of the things that were never achieved, even from the Amos Yoshua ben Nun, as it says in the Gemara. It says the version of the Pasuk. So it says, there were no sukkahs like this. Mi Amos Yoshua ben Nun, because they were so to the things that sukkahs is ultimately for, the destruction of the Yetzer Hara, the rebuilding of Elam Haba, not just of Elam Hazeh, the Yom HaNoshek, the Milchemes Gagul Magog. And the core of all of it is here, not in the vision that we have from the first Beis HaMikdash, But Adarabah, the vision that begins with the second Beis Hamikdash, in which they were kailo, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Beis Abakira, in which they were kailo, whatever they could understand of the vision of Yechezkel for the third Beis Hamikdash, and which becomes indeed the roots closer to the third Beis Hamikdash than the Beis Hamikdash Harishon. And that's the Gadol Yeh Bayit Hazeh. And the ultimate godless of this Bayit, undoubtedly, Gedula relates to the Elohim, Hagadol, Shegidloi, the Anshe Knesset says, Hagedola, in which what appears to us to be small, and we said this was the Kirun Zulut Livnei Adam, which is the Shir Shel Yom of Simchas Teres and Shmini Atzeres, that in that lies all of the ultimate tikkunim. So this is the introduction to what it is that he's doing. And so what he says, continuing in Pasuk Hey, V'omar, Ana Adonai Elohei Hashamayim, and already he takes the first step to undo Yirmiyahu Ha'el Hagadol V'Hanorah. He doesn't have the guts yet to say Hagibor, but Ha'el Hagadol V'Hanorah, Shomer HaBris, V'Chesed Lo'ohavav, V'Lo'Shomrei Mitzvosav. That part we know. That's already a quote, O'avav V'Shomrei Mitzvotav. But I'm asking more than that. I'm asking, I want your ears to be attuned, to be listening for any. Kashevet means you are waiting to identify a call. Now wait, we have to get through to you. There's still a tremendous difference. Kashevet. It's not I want you to listen. I want you to be attuned to hear. With Einecha Petuchot in advance, waiting to identify something you can respond to. Because, as we'll see, I know the situation stinks. Yes. But I also see the roots of Tikkun. And I want you to live with me with the roots of Tikkun, just as I understand the binyan of Yerushalayim to be the roots of Tikkun. And therefore I ask you, B'shmo Tfilat Avdecha, Shanochi mitpalel lefanecha hayom yomam v'alayla al bnei Yisrael abadeh. And not only that, but for almost the first time, we find somebody who's ready to admit the real vidui. Not only I was chaytei, but ani ubeit avi mitvadel chatot bnei Yisrael asher chatanu la, v'ani ubeit avi chatanu. Which is, as the Rambam says, you can't get anywhere. These Ta'aniyot that he had, and these Tefillot that he had, were the same vision of Ta'aniyot that the Rambam defines in Hilchot Ta'aniyot, in which the person is finally able to identify the pattern that keeps destroying all of our efforts for reconstruction. And once you identify the pattern, you understand that that pattern, even though it has all types of new faces and all types of new phases and different levels of sophistication, it's the same insane pattern, which unless you can get out of, you don't have a chance. Chavol chavalnu loch. This is a double meaning, beautiful double meaning. Chavol chavalnu, of course, the simple meaning is Kabbalah. We've been, terrible in how we have hurt you. The other meaning, Chavol chavalnu, is a lashon of Mishkan. Because the Mishkan is called a Mashkan. Mishkan Hashem, Mishkan Ha'idut. Why is it Mishkan? Because the Mishkan was mitmashken twice. So Chavol Chavalnu lach. So we have indeed become a Mashkan twice, and have indeed lost the Mishkan, even though we understood all along that it's going to be lost if we don't treat it as a Mashkan, and that it keeps us hanging. Please mute yourself. Somebody Gabby? Yeah, it's too much noise coming. There we go. Okay. And yet there's another intricate meaning in the Chavol Chavalnu. And that is, Chavala is also a lotion of joining up together. Because a chevel of Nevi'im is a bunch of people together, right? Chevel Nevi'im. You'll notice that all the words, a chabura means an attack, something on you, right? But it also means a group of people to do something together. Lo titgo to do, means the same thing. Don't tear your skin. It also means don't get together as different groups in the same city. So all these three words have the same double meaning and are merames to the danger of chavala that come from making groups. Yes, so I understand we've made tremendous number of different, tikkunim and everything. But the fact is that chaval chalanu lach because of it. V'lo shamarnu et ha-mitzvot v'et ha-chukim v'et ha-mishpatim asher tzivita et Moshe avdecha. So remember what you said. Zechor na et hadavar asher tzivita et Moshe avdecha limor. Atem timalu, you're screwed. Ani afitz etchem ma'amim. Amazing language. There's not even if, im atem timalu, boom, ani afitz etchem. Okay. But also, part of that is, and I say it this way on purpose, of course, because look how real that was. But there's another thing that was just as real. V'shavtem elai, no, v'im, v'shavtem elai, u'shmartem mitzvotai v'azitem otam, I don't care. Inyan yidi chacham miktzei hashamayim, misham hakaptzeim, v'aviotim ala makom asher bacharta l'shaker et shmi sham. Now, my question to you, therefore, is, what do you mean with v'shavtem elai? Because v'shavtem elai, when you said atem timalu, you didn't define the atem timalu. I don't know what it takes. All I know is, man, it sure as heck happened. You said atem timalu, okay, sure as heck happened. They say v'shavtem elai, many dargas of tshuva, But that v'shavtem elai, you said, I don't care where you are, I'm going to bring you all back. Now, I want you to notice that these people are all avadecha, amecha, asher padita, b'kochacha gadol v'yadcha chazaka. I mean, back in Mitzrayim, were they really any better? I thought it was like sort of memta sharituma, So all you looked for over there was, remez, a mitzvah, give a mitzvah, see if they respond to the mitzvah. Do they want to be shomer mitzvahs? Not that they have to be shomer mitzvahs, but they have a vision, and ultimately they'll be shomer mitzvahs. So I think that these people, you're right, they're not the best of people, but they want to be the best of people. So now, why don't we look at it like this? Ana Adonai, tehina oznecha kashevet otfilat avdecha zayaseh before. But now, since you're listening so carefully, perhaps we could expand it to include tfilat avadecha hachafetzim lira'at shemayim. I admit that they don't have any yirat shemayim. But I ask you, would they like that yirat shemayim? And this is basically, the old George Harrison song, forgive them, Lord, they can't afford you. So they want to be able to be yirat shemayim. They just can't afford it. Okay. But that ought to be the beginning of v'shavtem elai, right? And therefore, I believe that we can make this happen. But they need a space. They don't have a space. Hatzlichan alav l'chayom. What I want is for you to give me the hatzlacha. I'm about to go into the king, and I am going to be giving him his wine, my drinking buddy. Good old Hatar Shata speaks. And I'm going to be coming into my drinking buddy. That guy, Lifnei Aish Hazeh, I want to find favor in his eyes. You can make that happen. Ani hayiti mashkel lemelech. That was my job. And this whole feeling was to make that job work. This is an amazing opening to the Sefer. As you see the kind of person you're dealing with, what it is that he's attempting to achieve, and his consciousness of it, and the way in which he seeks to go about it. it's just a wonderful insight into the personality of Nehemia, qua Nehemia as a person. And this provides for us a key to understanding the Prakim Habaim. So I'm sorry for going on so long tonight. I just thought that the introduction is valuable and that it's good to hear it as part of the first Perek. And we could still include as an addendum, at least in the audio that we had last week that related the entire Perek to Sukkot and to Simchas Torah and showed how the Sefer as a whole addresses the issues of Sukkot and Simchas Torah, which are themselves very, very much the way in which we achieve exactly what Ezra sought to achieve. And what it was that he sought to achieve was exactly the ideas that Sukkot to Shmini Atzeres achieved. The differentiation between Yisrael and the Umay Sa'elam. And how do we achieve it on Sukkot? First, by being Nehemia. So we have the Shivim Purim, and we have the immense care for the inyanim of this space in Elam Hazeh. Simchas Torah comes afterwards. When you try to do it in the other direction, the way Ezra did it, doesn't work. And therefore, Nehemia becomes a tremendous lesson in the reality of the future of Klal Yisrael, in which the Pnei HaGeula in our times is built in exactly the same fashion. And so hopefully we'll have a chance to continue next week, Bezrat Hashem, and I love you all. See you. Nafi, I'll respond to your posts afterwards. Thank you for posting. Bye.